I was a born-again Christian, and I thought I was doing a pretty good job. I was going to church. I was, experiencing a lot of heart change, if you will, just in terms of relationships with my parents and friends and so on and so forth. However, my voting habits were still very liberal, and I was talking to a friend, and he said, how can you vote for the Democrat Party when, their values are not consistent with your own? And so long story short, he challenged me to read the Republican Party platform and the Democrat Party platform. And I read both of them. And sure enough, he was right. I didn't have anything in common at all with the Democrat Party as far as my faith was concerned. And so I decided to stop voting Democrat. But, I will also say that since then, I've kind of became a nonpartisan. I went Republican, but just found that both parties are basically two sides of the same coin. So, I still vote conservative, but I'm not a flag waving Republican by any means, if that makes sense. So.
Yep, totally get that. I feel as though I'm in the same boat. I do feel like they're a vessel for change, but I consider myself a Christian conservative American that happens to be black, and then I go from there. All right, Chad, you said one of your goals with this film, or this documentary, Uncle Tom 2, was you wanna break the spell. Break the spell that blacks have. You don't want them to be angry. You don't want them to be deceived. Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's definitely a spell. It's instilled in black kids, and I would venture to say other races as well, from a very early age. The fact of the matter is, we live in the most opportunity-rich country in the entire world. That's America. It's the very reason why people come from all over the globe to get here, because they know the opportunities that are available here. However, because of the kind of indoctrination that's instilled, particularly in black culture from a very early age, it kind of debilitates black youth, where we think that America is systemically racist, that there's no real hope for us. And so whenever all your hope is taken from you, naturally you flock to a certain party, certain race leaders, so on and so forth. And it's the reason why every time they're trying to, and by they I mean the left, every time they try to push some policy, guess who they use to do it? Black people.
Yeah.
And so, yes, in order for them to be successful in what they do, they need black people to do it. And the way that they keep black people kind of in lockstep is under that spell. And so it was my goal with this film to at least get people to a point where they're questioning some of the things that they've been told all their lives.
Let me ask you this. Was it when your friend confronted you and said, Chad, listen, you're a Christian, your voting habits don't align with your belief system. Was that, did the light click on right away? Did you have to go home and do research? Were you upset with him for even saying something like that to you?
I'm open to different ideas, so I don't typically get irate with anybody whenever they challenge me on something. But to answer your question, no, I didn't immediately start voting Republican or consider myself a conservative or anything like that. There were some things that, it was a very slow kind of go, if you will, because
Sure.
He was asking me questions and he was making certain assertions that were very logical and very difficult for me to rebuff. And so by the time I finally sat down and really read the Democrat Party platform and really tried to see where my own kind of innate views and those of my religious leanings, see where those lined up, I just honestly couldn't find anything that wasn't just overt propaganda, if you will.
Okay. All right. That makes sense to me. I want to go back to Uncle Tom too. And you guys played there was a woman, and I forget her name, forgive me, but she started talking about, basically it's the 1619 Project jargon, 401 years or, of oppression, and slavery can cause people to behave in a certain way, despite the fact that we know, first off, 1619 Project isn't true, but beyond that, if let me fast forward. She talks about Fort Comfort, and she talks about how it's impacted people in our black people in the generation that exists today. You guys show this 7-year-old little girl screaming "Black Lives." I mean, the girl just looks mad. She looks like she knows exactly what she's talking about. But Chad, this is a lie. I mean, I grew up in the '80s, and I'm telling you, in the '80s, it was hard. And I grew up in LA. And when we had friends whose parents were either divorced or not together, even in the '80s, we were kind of surprised. So this stuff, this hatred is taught, and I'm saying what I experienced in the '80s because honestly, before the '60s, black families were a great family unit. More blacks married together than even white couples.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so what they're doing, and it's encompassed in that little girl at the beginning of Uncle Tom too, as you mentioned. But what they're doing is they're literally trying to instill the spirit of paranoia in the minds of black youth, and the goal is to embitter them and to kind of build little soldiers, if you will, in a crusade to destroy America from within. This is well documented. You can go as far back as the 1928 Communist Comintern, where they had a strategic plan for black people. And the idea being to make black people feel as though they are other, that they are not truly Americans. This is the very reason why we have the term African American. Stokely Carmichael, right, who was one of the pioneers, if you will, of that word, said explicitly with his own words, if you think you're an American, you'll fight to preserve America. If you know you're not an American, you'll fight to destroy America. He said this, and it's that's actually included in the film. But we're
Chad,
at a point now where
Chad, just hold on with me. You were talking about Stokely Carmichael. You were talking about the term African American, and the concept or the idea was to disassociate blacks with the country of America. I wanted you to finish up your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so it was absolutely a kind of psychological ploy of identification. The idea being, Stokely Carmichael's words, if you think you are an American, you'll fight to preserve America. However, if you know you're not an American, you'll fight to destroy America. And that was the whole concept of inserting the African-American. And so it's kind of like you're the subgroup. And, sure enough, it has rendered the same kind of effects that they desired to render in the first place. And so to the point that you were making about, the indoctrination of the children, specifically as it relates to that 7-year-old girl at the front of our movie, they're doing that right now in our schools in a more sophisticated way with critical race theory and other things being taught in the school. They're calling it, all different types of things to try to veil what it is they're doing. They're calling it trauma-informed learning, social and emotional learning. They're calling it all these different things, but the effect is the same. To, in a very sophisticated way, teach your children, especially your black children, that they are victims of capitalism, victims of Western society, victims of America.
Yeah, this is astonishing to me. I even considered when I looked at that 7-year-old girl, and she was just so much anger in her face. And obviously, she's a 7-year-old girl. She doesn't know what the heck she's talking about. It also made me think of Greta Thunberg, Chad. And I'm like, she was used in the same way, in my opinion. All of this stuff is about Marxism, whether it's race Marxism, whether it's climate Marxism. But it astonished me. It shouldn't astonish me. But the left is willing to use whomever to get to their goal. But also what's fascinating, I want to get into this issue of Marxism or dive a little deeper into it. Marx, and you guys outline this in the film. And guys, please go check out Uncle Tom 2. Just go to salemnow.com. Salemnow.com. You can order it. It's well worth seeing. And I even say this, Chad, I want blacks to see this. And I want blacks to share it with family members if they're willing to see it. But I want a lot of white liberals to see this too. I want whites to share it with white family members. I want everyone to see this. Because when you see what Marxism has done to the black community and the effects of it, hopefully you will want nothing to do with it. Karl Marx had a couple of goals, and you guys outlined it in the film, and I want you to talk through this here, Chad. He wanted to destroy religion. He wanted to destroy private property. No one should have, screw God, basically, screw private property, and it's worked tremendously in the black community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole idea of destroying private property in particular is in America and countries like America, because we have a kind of free market entrepreneurship economy, it gives you the ability to apply whatever skill or talent you have and enjoy the fruits of your own labor. And that was actually happening in the South. That was happening all over America, really, but especially in the South, in a time where historians tell us that black people were oppressed, that there was no upward mobility, so on and so forth. What we found and what we put in our film is evidence that defied that showed that black people were thriving and succeeding all across the South. And they were doing so because of the free market entrepreneurship that Booker T. Washington taught about. And so the Marxists, because they didn't like that and because they wanted to use black people as cannon fire for their own agenda, they would go out of their way, as Manning Johnson talks about, who is also included in our film. They would go out of their way to create race issues.
Man, Chad, there's so much. There's so much here. I know that we won't have enough time to get to everything. I literally have a couple of pages of questions, so I'm going to have you on a podcast if you don't mind, because I just love to sit and go through so much of this stuff. You guys have done some fabulous research with this, and I'm so appreciative that you guys are putting this stuff out there. But before we went to the break, you were talking about the NAACP. You were talking about the Tulsa massacre. I want to talk a little bit about Black Harlem, but let's talk about the NAACP. You kind of went past that. I don't want to go past that. This is fascinating information. And if you guys check out the movie at salemnow.com, this is some of the stuff that you'll learn. So please expound on the NAACP, Chad.
Yeah, so the NAACP, as we demonstrate in the film, was started by white socialists, and how they were able to use, a black face and W.E.B. Du Bois to kind of be the kind of, glorified leader of the NAACP in order to give it validity in the minds of black people, which persists to this very day. People think of the NAACP as this kind of premier organization that only wants the best for black people, when in reality, the NAACP has never done anything positive for black people at all. This is an organization that was praised by presidents, both Republican and Democrat, since its inception. And the whole thing is a trick. The reality is, as Booker T. Washington, who W.E.B. Du Bois considered to be a rival of this, as Booker T. Washington points out, you don't necessarily need a race leader or any kind of race organization to be successful in America. All you must do is to be a man of honor, to be productive regardless of what your circumstances are, and you will be well on your way. The people who are applying what Booker T. Washington was talking about were succeeding. My own family is an example of that, to the extent that people gave in to the program of the NAACP. They didn't really bolt over very well as far as their communities are concerned. Take a look at Detroit. Take a look at Harlem. Take a look at south side of Chicago. All of these places where the NAACP has a stronghold in. The results really speak for themselves. But as Manning Johnson pointed out, the NAACP historically, especially prior to the 1960s, went out of their way to exacerbate and create race issues so they can have a means for begging for funds. And that persists to this very day with groups like Black Lives Matter.
This is fascinating, and this is why racism will never go away. Bob, I see you out there. Please don't go anywhere. We got a great caller on the line. I want to finish up this interview with Chad, but I want to make sure I address some of the stuff this guy's talking about in the military. But Chad, there's just so much. All right, Tulsa massacre. This I thought I knew. about this. You guys opened my eyes to some things. Touch on the Tulsa massacre, if you would, please.
Yeah, so Tulsa, and hopefully we can maybe do. I'd love to talk with you more about it on your podcast. So I'll try to
Sure.
cover it very briefly. So as mainstream journalists today point out, wrongly, they say that 300 black people died. That's false. The fact of the matter is, in the brawl, which is what it really was, it wasn't a massacre, it was a brawl, which turned into a riot. There were a couple dozen people who died, both black and white. And the reason why there was a brawl in the first place is because a lie was spread by a newspaper, which was called the Tulsa Tribune. The article was written by a man named Richard Lloyd Jones. Richard Lloyd Jones was a self-proclaimed progressive. He had connections with the Communist Party, and he would regularly write similar articles to entice racial friction, specifically among whites. And it worked, specifically with the Tulsa race riot. There was an accusation against a man named Dick Rowland that was untrue. And, the rest is history. Historians to this very day use that moment. They don't tell you all the facts, but they use that moment to say that black people can never really get ahead, even when we go the capitalist way, even when we try to abide by the rules. White people always come and they burn it down. And that's the narrative that they hope to push with the so-called Tulsa massacre. But yeah, I would love to discuss it in more depth with you, with more nuance and context, so that way, people really get it.
We only have a couple of minutes left here, Chad, but this race hustling, this race business has continued with Black Lives Matter, a very clever name, but Marxists themselves, and they've done a lot of damage to the black community, have they not?
Yeah, and they're continuing to do so. One of the things that Black Lives Matter has done, or I would say that they've mastered, is what communists have always mastered, which is slogans. They understand that a lot of people aren't going to go past slogans. They're going to be emotionalized and sensationalized by a good-sounding, catchy slogan. And that's exactly what happened with Black Lives Matter, because they understand that there's strength in numbers, or the perception of numbers. And so the more you can get churches, you can get organizations, you can get corporations, and just regular average Joe people saying Black Lives Matter, or posting a black square, or, having a bumper sticker that says Black Lives Matter, what it does is it creates in the mind of the spectator this idea that this must be a legitimate, credible organization since everybody's behind it, when the reality is most of those people who are posting all those things have no idea what the organization is all about. And so they win in the space of advertising and marketing. But people like yourself, people like Brandon Tatum, who are doing the work of exposing what this organization really is, most people aren't interested in hearing it because they are captivated by the slogan. And so they get to kind of fly under the radar. But I am happy to see that more and more people are becoming aware of the evil organization that Black Lives Matter actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. Chad Jackson, listen, man, everybody please go out and see this film. I've got quotes from all the stars that I'm going to talk about afterwards here, from Officer Tatum, from Carol Swain, from Bodie Bacham. This is an important film. Share it with your neighbor, share it with a family member. God bless you, Chad Jackson. I appreciate you coming on to the Officer Tatum
Thank
Show.
you for having me.